I'm a psychiatrist by profession, and over the course of my career, I have dealt with many people who have strange and unusual problems. However, one case in particular disturbed me more than any other. There was a family of 3 who lived next door to me. They were a married couple in their late 50s, and they had a son who was about 30 years old. The son was what we call in Japan a hikikomori. Somebody who is introverted, reclusive and isolated. Someone who has withdrawn from social contact. We never saw the son. People who are hikikomori usually lock themselves away in their rooms and avoid others. I didn't hear about his condition directly from his parents. I assumed they didn't want to discuss it. In Japan, people are very concerned about appearances, and having a son who is hikikomori is an embarrassment. As the days passed, their son went out less and less. Eventually, he never came out of the house at all. Every night, from his bedroom window, the furious voice of his mother could be heard screaming and shouting at him. Whenever I met the poor woman, she smiled and said hello, but the strain was showing in her face. She became pale and haggard. It had been almost 6 years since anyone had seen the son. One day, the father knocked on my door and asked me to come to his house. He knew I was a psychiatrist, and since we were neighbors, I decided to do what I could to help the family. When we got to the front door, the mother was there waiting for us. She led me upstairs to her son's room. She banged on the door with her fist and shouted, "We're coming in." Then, she burst into the room and shrieked, "Are you going to sleep forever? Get up, you lazy good-for-nothing." Before I knew what was happening, she grabbed a golf club and started beating the sleeping figure under the covers. For a moment, I was struck dumb as she rained down blow after blow. Then, I sprang into action, grabbing the golf club and wrestling her out of the room. I hurried back inside to check on her son's injuries, but when I pulled back the bed covers, I couldn't believe my eyes. Lying beneath the sheets was a mummified corpse. I stood there terrified, staring at the pile of bones and leathery old skin. The father approached me, hanging his head in shame. "Our son died 6 years ago. It was my wife that I wanted you to see," he said.
Okay, this is not a story that I have heard of. In fact, this is something which I experienced personally. So here is my story. I am going anonymous for the sole reason that person about whom I am going to talk is an avid Quarren, and I don't want him to realize that it is about him. Be patient, it might be a long one, but nevertheless each bit of it is true. Might not be the spookiest one, but yes, made my belief stronger that there is another world. Incident 1. First day. We group of 6 bachelors moved into a new rented house in Bangalore's central locality. House was awesome to say the least. 3 spacious bedrooms, separate dining room, 1 central hall, and a kitchen of course. That's not all. There is small passage which will take you to a huge veranda, all this on first floor. And from veranda you can go to the terrace where you can easily have a night parties. To be honest, I still miss that place at times. There were 4 of us who came first, so of course, we had a first mover advantage. We occupied 2 best rooms. Me and the other guy in one room, call him Y, and 2 other guys in the other room, call them S and H. Below is the top view of the house for your reference. Hope diagram makes some sense. D, just 2 mentioned green arrows depicts door, and red ones are windows. 1 so in couple of hours, only after we were done with shifting, H called to me his room and said, "Read this," pointing to something written over his room's wall. It read, "Leave this house for good people. Sorry to disappoint you, but no special effects here." It was written with a pencil by someone who is not very accustomed to English. Can clearly make it out from its handwriting. We of course made little fun of it, but I don't know, somewhere it didn't feel good. I have led a nomad life all my life, so it was never trouble for me to settle down at new place. So night falls, and all of us pretty tired fell asleep early. I am 28, and that night I saw the worst nightmare of my life. It was so close to real that I woke up all sweating. And even after couple of minutes in the awakened state, I still was scared of that dream. It was around 5 when I woke up of my dream and thought to have a smoke, so went to the passage area between room and veranda. Few minutes later when I came in, I saw H coming out the room all sweaty. And yes, you guessed it right, he was forced to wake up due to some real nightmare. Coincidence? Wait for it. Few minutes later, hardly after another 5 to 10 minutes, S came out, and he looked more frightened than both of us. Only thing he said, "Is there something wrong?" We asked what happened, and the same answer of a weird spooky dream. That was it. We were actually scared now. I only asked both of them, "Is it something to do with some figure, wood and chain?" And they said yes. I had to tell you, I still get goosebumps while I am writing it. That was one mother of coincidence. 3 point to note here is that night, my roommate Y slept peacefully without any issues till 10 in the morning. Incident 2, spookiest of all. On the very other night, forgetting about weird coincidence that we had on previous night, we were chit-chatting till 1 a.m. Next day, everyone has office, and so it's time to hit the bed. Pleasantries were exchanged, and all of us crashed on to our beds. It was around 4 a.m. that night when I wake up to sounds of a guy shooing something away. I slowly open my eyes without expecting or getting scared. To my utter horror, I could see a silhouette just next to my bed with something in its hand, and moving that thing vigorously over my bed, and at the same time making sounds as if it is trying to shoo something off from above me. Within seconds I realized it was my roommate who was doing that thing. I immediately switched on the lights. Switchboard is next to my bed. There he is standing with that bloodshot, terrified red eyes and staring at me without blinking. I literally shouted at him and said, "Dude, WTF? What are you doing?" To which he said in the most possible petrified voice, "Dude, I am scared." I tried to be the stronger one here and told him, "It's okay, nightmares are common. Better try to sleep again." His and my bed was perpendicular to each other, such that from his bed he could easily see the entire me lying on my bed. To be honest, I was half dead by this time. Still, I somehow tried to keep calm, and without switching off the lights again, just lied in my bed. All this time, Y was facing me and continuously staring at me, but not actually at me, but someplace above me. And he just won't blink. It felt as if he could see something floating above me, and he is shit scared to tell me that. Time went by, and then I heard azan at distance. I am not Muslim, but trust me, that day azan was the thing that put me to sleep. I woke up, and first thing first, so I asked Y what was last night all about. He said it was not a dream. He could see some figure floating above me, and that he was just trying to shoo that thing away, because it was terrifying to see that thing there. I was again half dead. That was it. No broker a magic bricks, cooker, everything was opened on my smartphone, and search for new home began. But no, it's not that simple to get such a nice home in Bangalore. Rather, I made sure to do daily puyas, and made sure to read Hanuman Chalisa every day at my place. Did doing this stop all these things? No, it didn't, but somehow I felt safe. You see, they say, it's all in your head. This was not all. There were few other incidents that happened in span of those 2 years. When he stayed there, which made me believe that they do exist whether you believe it or not. I will surely add those incidents to the same answer when I am less lazy. Any logical explanation behind what all happened is always welcome. Edit 1. I am sorry for being lazy and not updating with further details earlier. Here are few other incidents in a nutshell. Incident 3. In room adjacent to ours, there was always some kind of heaviness in the air, and very frequently windows with glass panes, which are closed, will make rhythmic sound as if someone is knocking at it constantly. But it was neither too loud nor too soft, but it indeed was not due to wind or whatsoever. You keep that window open, and sometimes it will close by itself, which of course can be cause of wind. But whenever it closes by itself, those sounds will indeed be there. We felt they just wanted us to realize their presence. Incident 4. This is something to which I can't provide any logical explanation, even if I want. My roommate is basically from North India, who shifted to Bangalore only a year back with absolutely no knowledge whatsoever of local languages of South. He couldn't even differentiate between Telugu, Kannada, and Tamil, hence forget about talking in those languages. One night around 2, I was watching a movie and my roommate was sleeping. All of a sudden, he woke up, sat upright, and was staring at me with those bloodshot red eyes. And he said something to me in Tamil, and then was smiling at me with most devilish cunning smile. I asked what, and he again said something in Tamil. I do not understand Tamil completely, but could clearly make out it was Tamil. And he wanted me to go somewhere with him. That's all I could interpret. Somehow I was used to his midnight adventures by now, so this was less frightening, but nevertheless immensely mysterious. Cause I can bet my life he don't know even a word of Tamil. I just told him we are not going anywhere, you sleep, and he slept. Other interesting incident was a clock in the dining area which no matter how many times you change batteries, it will always stop at 11:30-ish. I don't know day or night, but this happened almost thrice. We just took it down, placed in an empty almirah. Problem solved. And there were few random incidents of tap getting on by itself in morning wee hours and getting stopped by itself. And noises of someone on the terrace about our room almost every day. But all these were nothing compared to what all I have mentioned above. What did I learn or interpret from all these incidents? They do exist. Only thing is they don't interfere in your life, and you better do the same. Respect their privacy and believe in God. They will not harm you for no reason. The old saying went that the late-night bus didn't always carry the living. I never believed it until I became the late-night bus driver myself. Several months back, I had been in a terrible accident that left me with a significant head injury and selective amnesia. I could recall where I was from, my upbringing, and my name, yet the details of the crash eluded me, though I heard it was ghastly. Discharged from the hospital, I was desperate for work and stumbled upon a flyer stuck to a lamppost. It read, Concord Transportation hiring a bus driver. Night shift, rural routes, competitive pay. Since my last job was as a bus driver, I dialed the number with a mix of hope and skepticism. Arriving at the interview location, my heart sank. The transportation company was situated on the outskirts of town. An isolated spot marked by an ancient vine-strangled building, its walls half-eaten by yellowish stains of stale water. Buses lay scattered along the curbside, dented and rust-eaten, doors marred with pits and scrapes. I wondered how such ramshackle vehicles were even permitted to run. The hiring manager, Frank Sterner, a rigid man of about 40 with a wooden disposition, seemed somewhat satisfied with my driving test. He pointed to the oldest, most decrepit 17-seater in the lot and said, "Once you're on board, this is your wagon." He then briefed me on the job. It was simple. Leave precisely at 10:30 p.m. from the main station, drive to Mayfield town's last stop, rest for 20 minutes, and head back. A monthly salary of $5,000 with insurance and a night shift bonus of $1,000. Satisfied, I was more than satisfied. It seemed like a dream. Walking into the office to sign the contract, Frank suddenly stopped me. "Blake, our company has strict rules. There are a few requirements you must remember." Eager not to lose such an opportunity, I nodded for him to continue. "First, no relationships during employment, no touching women." "I'm single," I replied, a bit surprised, expecting a discussion on company policies first. "Good." He relaxed a touch. "From the main station to Mayfield, there are 5 stops. Do not stop unless it's at those stations. Each requires a 3-minute halt, clear." "What if a passenger needs a bit more time to disembark?" I asked, already guessing the answer. "Don't bother with that. Just do as I say, got it?" "Lastly, after midnight, just drive back. No matter who tries to stop your bus, do not halt." Finishing his spiel, Frank reached for his teacup. "Agree to these, and we will sign the contract." Agreed. I needed the job too badly to be put off by his odd requirements, so I quickly completed the onboarding process. That afternoon, I moved into the dormitory and managed a brief rest. By 10 o'clock, I hurried to the starting point. The bus was in worse shape than I remembered, a loose door, patchy with a hole that whistled when I drove, impossible to seal properly. Checking the schedule, I took off on time. The suburban roads were rough, unlit, and I dared not speed. It took over 10 minutes to reach the first stop at Hargrove Hamlet. A young man with a briefcase was my first passenger. He looked young but had an eerily blank expression. He walked straight to the back without paying. "Ticket," I called after him. He paused, baffled as if the concept was foreign to him. At last, he fumbled for a few coins to hand to me. His odd behavior caught my eye. Once seated, he just stared out into the night, vacant and weary. The journey was bumpy. At the second stop, he stood up to leave and suddenly said, "Start earlier next time. Nobody gets on here. Rules say 3 minutes each stop, I replied, turning to ask how he'd know, but he was already gone. That guy's fast, I muttered, true to his word. No other passengers were waiting at the rest of the stops. It didn't seem strange, the route was too out of the way, and it was late. First time jitters perhaps, but it was around 2 a.m. by the time I finished the route and returned to base. The next morning, while buying breakfast, Frank Sterner approached me, his presence as imposing as the day before. He inquired, "How did your first night go?" "Any trouble? Smooth now," I replied. "Had one passenger, the silent type. Didn't even want to buy a ticket until I insisted." He gave a nonchalant chuckle. "No worries, this route's not a moneymaker for us. Whether he pays or not doesn't matter." Was it my imagination, or did Frank's lips twitch unnervingly as he spoke? A twinge of curiosity about his strange reaction nipped at me, but my need for the job overrode any lingering questions. The following night, driving the rust bucket they called a bus, I encountered the same young man. Just like before, he clutched his briefcase, and without a word or the exchange of fare, he made straight for the back seat. Recalling Frank's words, I suppressed the urge to ask for payment this time. After reaching the second stop at Worcester Junction, he stood up and gave me the same line, "Start earlier next time." Nobody gets on here. Initially, I thought he was joking, but events proved he wasn't lying. For a whole week, he was my only passenger, disembarking at the very same stop each time. Reporting this oddity to Frank, I chuckled that the young man seemed psychic, predicting his travel with eerie accuracy. Frank's hand froze mid-motion as he was offering me a cigarette, and he scoffed dismissively, "Nonsense, it's just a coincidence that there are no other passengers." But surely enough, the next day, the script of my nightly sojourns altered. I remember clearly that all the abnormal occurrences began on my 8th day of work. Like usual, I dropped off the young man at the second stop, jesting, "Guess whether someone else will board my bus tonight." He just smiled wryly and replied, "Besides me, no one else will." And after the prescribed 3-minute wait, the stop was still vacant as he'd predicted. I sighed to myself, wondering if the decrepit vehicle I drove existed merely for a single passenger's convenience. Suddenly, a resounding male voice from behind startled me, "Driver, open up." I need to get on. Spinning around, I saw a bald man thumping on the bus door. "Well, there's someone," I said under my breath, smiling as I let the eager passenger in. His entrance was a rush, and after a quick, pale glance at where the young man sat, he urged, "Please, drive on." "I'm in a hurry." As soon as we left the stop, he relaxed and moved closer to chat, "First time on this route." I nodded, "Yeah. How could Yautel? I ride this bus often." "Of course, I recognize a new face," he said with a chuckle, offering me a cigarette. I declined, "Sorry, smoking's not allowed on the bus." He stuffed it between his lips anyway, bending his head to light it. "I only ever smoke on this particular journey," he muttered. I wanted to stop him, but it felt trivial just him and the smoky mist within the empty confines of the bus. The bald man was talkative, puffing away, asking if it got lonely driving solo at night. I told him it wasn't so bad, and in turn asked about his situation, working so late. Me, "Ah well ... he trailed off, laughter dusting his features with mystery. Pulling into the next stop, Stoke Newington, he finished his cigarette and handed me another, as he was leaving. "Here, for the road. None will board your bus anyways." His words echoed eerily similar to the young man's. Waiting at the station drew no passengers, confirming his claim. Shaking my head and laughing to myself, I pulled away from the stop. Just as I was about to clear the station's boundary, a woman darted into the road, clutching a child. "Driver, stop." Her sudden appearance nearly caused a collision. My heart leapt as I slammed the brakes. "You could have been hit. Can't you be more careful with a child?" I admonished her as they boarded. "Sorry," she breathed, repeatedly, guilt etched on her face. Seeing her remorse, I let it slide and glanced at the child nestled in her arms. He was about 5 or 6, bundled up tightly, his face partly obscured. His forehead bore a hint of blue beneath the skin, suggesting a fever wrapped in too many layers. I asked, "Is he all right? The little guy looks sick." The silence was her reply as she moved further back, the boy now resting on her shoulder. The boy peered at me with dark eyes that blinked a thank you through a ghastly pale face. "Listen to your mom and get well soon," I said, maintaining a friendly facade despite the odd unease settling in. He quietly replied, "But mommy says my sickness won't get better." As I gazed at the boy's gaunt face, a pang of concern pierced my thoughts. Could he be gravely ill? I wondered, pity swelling in my chest for this delicate child. Unwavering, I kept the bus on course and soon docked at the terminal of Mayfield Town. Expertly, I brought the hulking machine to a gentle stop and turned to notify the mother and son that it was time for them to disembark. The woman looked up with gratitude, murmuring a courteous thank you, her voice a soft chime over the hum of the idling engine. She carefully guided her son off the bus. However, after taking a few paces away, she pivoted sharply, aiming a haunting smile back in my direction. Once my shift concluded, I returned to the depot to check out, and there was Frank, languidly sprawled on the grass next to where the buses were parked. He sprung to his feet as I parked and approached with a cigarette jutting from his lips, a welcoming smile on his face. "How's the nightlife on wheels treating you?" he inquired with a teasing glint in his eyes. "It's bearable," I shrugged noncommittally, ignoring his offered cigarette, and instead fished out the one left by the bald gentleman. "Save it for yourself. I've got this one," I told Frank. His bemusement was palpable as he watched me examine the cigarette he'd assumed was mine. "Since when did you start smoking on the job?" he questioned with a raised eyebrow. I hastened to clear the confusion. No, this isn't mine. It was left for me by a passenger." My voice trailed off mid-sentence. Something was off about this cigarette. The filter was tainted with splotches of black, the tobacco damp, and emanated a pungent, earthy stench as if this thing had spent ages buried underground. I brought it to my nose, and the rancid odor that met me nearly induced a gag reflex. Frank caught on to the commotion, his face a portrait of discomfort as he murmured, "Toss the moldy stick and don't take stuff from passengers anymore." "Right," I muttered, eager to be rid of it. Without a second thought, I flung the sodden cigarette away and set off for a much-needed rest in my dorm. Throughout the walk, my mind spun, questioning the intentions of the bald man. Was his kindness merely a facade? A cruel prank? I didn't allow myself to ruminate too deeply. Exhaustion claimed me, and I surrendered to sleep as soon as I hit the bed. The adage burning the candle at both ends rang true. Since the commencement of this nocturnal duty, my vitality had withered noticeably. That night, my rest was fraught with an eerie restlessness. In the small hours, on the brink between reality and dreams, I felt a presentient illusion of a woman at my side, her hands venturing daringly towards my waistband. I awakened the next morning to an embarrassing dampness. I had succumbed to a nocturnal emission. Rising swiftly, I dashed to the bathroom to rinse my briefs and caught my reflection in the mirror. The man peering back was almost unrecognizable. My skin was sallow, dark circles hollowing my eyes, a visage of sheer exhaustion. While combing my hair, an alarming number of strands came loose, prompting a deep-seated anxiety that propelled me to seek medical attention in the afternoon. The clinic was nondescript, its familiar antiseptic scent trailing my steps as I narrated my symptoms. The doctor's probing was thorough, his stern face softening with concern as his stethoscope swept over me. "Moderation is a key, young man," he imparted soberly after prescribing a list of medications. I was confounded. Could a single, troubled dream truly wreak this havoc? With pills in my pocket and the clock ticking toward 10, I hastened my steps, eager to resume my nocturnal journey. As I raced toward the front of the bus, a chilling sight detained my progress. A pile of ghost money was set ablaze before my vehicle, carefully housed within a brazier that had been reduced to ash. Flanked by flickering candles, their sparks dancing indiscriminately, a sight so unsettling in the dim light. Who the hell did this? I cursed under my breath, glancing at my watch. I was nearly late, prompting me to abandon further inquiry. At the first stop, the briefcase-carrying young man timely appeared, but his behavior was odd. He kept stealing glances at me, his demeanor restless, as if he harbored unspoken words. Once we hit the second stop, he stood to leave, muttering, "Don't wait, no one's gone aboard here." I laughed it off. "Don't joke around, Wo says so." "Just last night, an old guy got on after you left." "What old guy?" his grip on the briefcase tightened visibly. He swung toward me with eyes so intense it sent a chill down my spine. "Swiping sweat from my brow," I said. "Just a regular middle-aged guy." "Hey," he smirked, glancing peculiarly at me before coldly grinning and departing into the darkness. He retracted his gaze, a bemused smile creeping on his lips as he tossed out a question seemingly from nowhere. "He didn't offer you a cigarette, did he?" I stared in confusion, taken aback by his odd inquiry. How could he possibly know? "Don't smoke," he advised with a playful edge to his tone, giving me an appraising once-over before scoffing lightly and turning to disappear into the shadows. I was left dumbfounded, the unsettling intensity in his eyes as he left etched in my mind. 2 days later, it was as if he had vanished into thin air, no longer a fixture on my nightly route. Without his presence, the empty bus felt eerily unquiet, especially on a night when a drizzle painted the world outside with a weary brush. By the time I pulled into the terminal, the town's clock was chiming beyond midnight. I recalled Frank Sterner's firm instruction at the stroke of midnight: no more passengers to be picked up, just turn back. So, I decided to loop the bus for the return journey. That's when a woman appeared out of the mist, her figure haloed by the faint glow of a street lamp, a small umbrella her only shield against the rain. She stepped into the lamplight, calling out, "Driver, could you please open the door?" Through rain-streaked windows, I saw it was the woman I remembered cradling a child before. Tonight, she stood alone. Checking my watch, which sternly reminded me of the hour past due, I hesitated, torn. "Sorry, ma'am. This bus doesn't take passengers after midnight." She blinked rapidly, a seductive plea in her eyes. "But it's raining, and I have no way to get home. Can't you make an exception?" Sighing, reluctance giving way to compassion, I relented and swung the door open. As she stepped aboard, almost as an afterthought, I asked about her absent child. "He's been admitted to the hospital," she said softly, tucking the umbrella behind the seat as she settled in. I exhaled, a sigh of resignation. It seemed the kid was indeed very sick. Rain slicked the roads that night, making it impossible to drive fast. The dimly lit, thumping interior of the bus was occupied by just myself, and one ethereal woman whose presence filled the space with a subtle tension. As I approached the spot where she had hailed the bus last time, I pulled over voluntarily, but to my surprise, she showed no sign of wanting to leave. Instead, she shuffled toward me with coy steps, a blush coloring her cheeks as she sheepishly asked if I could lend her some money for an emergency. What? I was taken aback. What kind of relationship did we have that she felt comfortable asking me for money? Before I could even articulate a refusal, she began unbuttoning her coat, tears streaming down as she implored, "Please, sir. My child is direly ill, and the hospital won't administer treatment without payment." My mind buzzed with disbelief and a sudden surge of empathy. In the end, compassion won over my initial hesitation. I handed her $300, urging her to get off the bus and attend to her child. She took the money and offered a lingering look of profound thanks. Then, as she turned to leave, she whispered faintly, "You are a good man. Watch out for your boss." The sound of rain was too loud, and I could barely make out her words, but I caught something about the boss. Before I could ask for clarification, she had stepped off into the night. What does she mean by that? Honestly, since taking this job on the night bus, I've felt that every passenger who turns up is a bit peculiar, though I can't quite put my finger on why. Driving on rainy nights is dangerous, and by the time I got back to my apartment, it was well past 3 in the morning. After a shower, I hit the bed straight away. In a state between dreaming and waking, I found myself caught in a lustful dream again. This time, I saw her clear-lit woman from my dream was the same who had asked me for money the previous day. No surprise, upon waking up, I realized I had experienced another wet dream. My heels felt unusually tender, and a look in the mirror confirmed I was more haggard than ever. There was an indescribable sense of eeriness inside me, having had these nocturnal emissions twice now, both times after encountering her. Could it just be a coincidence? Post-shower, I intended to change clothes, but found yesterday's underwear still damp. Sighing, I head downstairs commando to the supermarket. Passing through the hallway, the elderly doorman stopped me with a sly grin. "Are you in love, young man?" I was bewildered, responding with a denial. What made you think that? Then what are those noises from your room at night? He pressed, skeptical, a mixture of amusement and mockery on his face. My heart skipped a beat. What noises, yo? The vigor of youth. The doorman chuckled suggestively, shaking his head as he walked away. Things started to get even weirder from there on. I began to dream about her almost every night, and our encounters on the bus were entirely silent. She ignored me, and I never initiated the conversation. But as soon as I returned to my apartment, there she was in my dreams again, always ready to embrace me with fervor. My mental state was deteriorating, and so was my physical health. I'd often catch myself daydreaming while driving. Frank Sterner seemed to notice something was off and approached me one day after our shifts. Concerned, he pressed me. Blake, what's wrong with you lately? Spit it out. Embarrassed, I dodged the question, insisting it was nothing. Blake, you're keeping something from me, Frank insisted, staring me down. I've heard from the doorman. There's been noise from your room. Are you forgetting the company policy about fraternizing during work hours? Caught with no way out, I confided in him about my recurring dreams. He remained silent after I explained, simply lighting a cigarette and muttering, as long as you didn't sleep with her. What's wrong? Nothing. Frank hesitated, reminding me to rest well before finding an excuse to leave. I watched him go, feeling like there was something he wasn't telling me. Sure enough, the next morning before departure, I was greeted by a pile of burnt ghost money in front of my bus. I wondered if Frank had anything to do with it, but when I called him, he denied it. A few days later, I parked at the first station, so tired that I rested my head on the steering wheel for a moment. Then footsteps approached, and I turned to see none other than the bald man. What brings you here? I was confused. The young man was usually my first passenger. With a mysterious smile, the bald man said he was here to keep me company. I was befuddled and chose to dismiss it as a joke. When we reached the third stop, I saw her, the woman. As I began to pull up, the bald man yelled, "Don't stop." Confused, I asked, "Why not?" But instead of answering, he grabbed the steering wheel and floored the accelerator, speeding past the stop. Furious, I confronted him. "What are you doing?" "That's dangerous. If you stop now, it'd be far more dangerous," he retorted. Then after a moment of silence, he lit up a cigarette and said, "If you see her again, don't let her on the bus." I demanded an explanation. "Didn't Frank tell you?" His words stunned me. "You know him." He glanced at me and revealed, "Of course, I know him. I used to drive this bus before you." "What?" I was even more astonished and blurted out, "Then why did you quit?" He started to scornfully chuckle, saying, "Do you think that with the easy hours, good pay, and benefits only an idiot would resign?" I did harbor similar thoughts, but sensing there had to be more to his resignation, I stayed quiet, awaiting more information. With a sense of bitterness, he revealed, "Because it's a hearse." "What?" I felt a chill run through me, instinctively hitting the brakes. "Keep driving. Don't stop," he insisted in a panic, pressing down on my shoulder. "This bus can't stop until we reach the final destination." I realized if he knew such details, he must indeed be a predecessor. I couldn't fathom, however, why he would call it a hearse. "Don't believe me," he sneered after taking a drag of his cigarette, his voice becoming a ghostly whisper. 2 years ago, this bus was involved in a catastrophic accident. The driver, due to a petty dispute with the supervisor, had downed half a bottle of vodka before taking out the bus. By a cruel twist of fate, he met a woman trying to flag the bus down, holding her child. The drunken driver confused the gas pedal with the brake, resulting in a tragedy. "What did you say?" My skin crawled, recalling the woman who had flagged down the bus, holding what seemed to be a child. His expression turned pallid as he recounted, "The following month, the first driver of this bus died in a mysterious crash. And then the subsequent driver met the same fate, after less than a year in the seat. And then it was my turn. He numbly pointed to himself. On his first day, he encountered the same woman and child but dismissed it. Back in his room, he had dreamed of being in an intimate moment with the woman, not just once. His health declined, and he found himself utterly exhausted on one of his drives, dozing off with his arms around the steering wheel, almost causing an accident. I didn't want to show fear, but my twitching facial muscles betrayed my internal terror. His experience was eerily like my own. He coughed before he continued. Later I searched online, and some people told me the woman I dreamed of was the one who died in the accident with her son. They were wronged, and their restless spirits latched onto the bus. The mother would drain the drivers, one by one. I recoiled in horror, longing to let go of the steering wheel. But something didn't add up. I looked at the bald man. Then how come you're still alive? He offered a bitter smile and rolled up his sleeve. Under the dim dashboard light, I spotted a centipede-like scar from his elbow up to his shoulder. Do I look okay to you? His explanation was chilling. Anyone who boarded that bus was cursed, and what seemed a cozy job was a death trap. My hands on the wheel quivered uncontrollably. After a long silence, I managed to ask, "How did you survive?" "I have my ways." He removed the cigarette from his mouth, expressionless. This pack was specially made by a shaman, soaked in dog's blood, with ashes of a black cat mixed into the tobacco. Spirits fear this. It dawned on me then. Why he had given me the oddly hairy cigarette was to protect me from the ghostly curse. As the heavy doors of the office slammed shut behind me, I made a beeline for the heart of the matter. "Frank, the car I've been driving, has it been involved in a serious accident before?" Frank Sterner's expression morphed into confusion. "What sort of accident?" I was so infuriated that I grabbed him by the collar and bellowed, "That car has a ghost, Frank. I've been haunted. Do you get that?" "A ghost?" His eyes bulged in bewilderment, a nervous chuckle escaping him. "You're joking, right?" I knew he would deny it. Firmly, I said, "Last night, I met with the previous night shift driver. He told me everything." "Hold on." Frank's mouth formed a perfect O. "What previous driver?" "There have only been two of us, you and me. There was never a third." "What do you mean?" Now it was my turn to be stunned. Seeing my confusion, Frank patted me on the shoulder. "Blake, have you been getting enough rest lately?" "You seem ... I shook my head, still trying to process, before finally managing a hoarse whisper. "So, it's just been you and me driving that bus." "Nobody else," Frank asserted confidently. "I was only appointed as supervisor recently. Before you, I used to drive that bus." "What exactly happened? Can you tell me?" I nodded and recounted the tale of the bald man word for word. Frank laughed midway through my story. "So, it's him." "Do you know him?" I inquired, puzzled. "Not really," Frank admitted, a smile playing on his lips. "But when I was driving, I did see him a few times. The man's been out of sorts after his son's tragic incident. You shouldn't take his words to heart." I felt utterly lost as I replied, "He had a son." "Of course," Frank confirmed, nodding, "a very talented kid." "Such a shame he died so young." I asked what had happened. Frank hesitated before sighing. His son died of a sudden heart attack while he was on his way home from a grueling shift at work. "How do you know this if you weren't close to the bald man?" I pressed. "I have to know," Frank replied with a bitter smile, "because nobody knows better than me how he died." Frank's story continued, his voice a mixture of pain and remembrance. "I was driving the night shift 2 years ago. Around 10:50 p.m. that night, his son boarded at the first stop. He fell asleep against the window and never woke up. By the time the bus reached the last stop, he was dead." He rummaged through his desk drawer, producing an old newspaper and passing it to me. "The bald man's son died right in front of me. That's why I remember it so well. I even kept the newspaper from back then." I hastily took the newspaper, flipping through it in a frenzy until I landed on the page reporting the sudden death on the night bus. The photo on the paper made my head swim with shock. It was the young man with the briefcase. "Why him?" My fingers trembled uncontrollably as I dropped the newspaper and slumped back onto the sofa. "What's wrong?" Frank asked, completely at a loss. "Frank," my voice quavered with fear as I faced him. "Remember the first passenger I ever picked up?" "Yeah, the one who couldn't afford a ticket," Frank casually replied. I felt an unnatural pallor wash over me. He looks exactly like the bald man's son." "What?" Frank jumped up, his forehead bulging with veins, his face ashen. "That's impossible." "Yes, how could a man who died 2 years ago still periodically ride my night bus?" Closing my eyes, memories of terror swirled in my mind. After a moment, I looked back at Frank, a miserable expression on my face. I think I've been looking in the wrong direction all along. It's not the woman and child. The true ghost is the bald man's son. Don't scare me, Blake. Frank wiped the sweat from his brow, his demeanor alarmed. Are you certain you saw it, right? My response was numb silence as I turned away and left the office. Where are you going? Frank called after me, grabbing my arm at the door. I turned back. I'm going to sleep in the dormitory, and tonight, I'll go to the station to check. Even though you suspect a ghost, you're still going? Frank was incredulous. With my eyes shut, I muttered wearily. First, I'm not entirely sure if the young man is a ghost. Maybe he just resembles one. Second, even if he is a ghost, I need to find out why he's after me. Lastly, and most importantly, if a ghost is really after me, where could I possibly escape? With that, I walked away, leaving Frank at the doorway as the dark veil of night began to fall over the city. Resolved to face the unknown, I decided to drive the bus once more, a chance perhaps to reason with the young man, the bald man's supposed son. All I can do is wish you luck. Frank's hand fell away, his face as white as a paste. At 10:30 p.m., with the same quiet resolve as always, I settled into the driver's seat. Determined yet bracing for the worst, I turned the key. Despite every cell in my body quivering with terror, I managed to steer the bus towards the first stop. It might have been my imagination, but when the doors hissed open at the station, a chilling gust seemed to sweep in, rising to the top of my head. The night was cool, shrouded in a layer of fog, making the platform seem unnervingly eerie. The young man was nowhere in sight, and I decided to wait. After all, I owed it to myself to speak my mind, to get some answers. Waiting was torturous in its uncertainty. Feeling helpless, my gaze fell upon the cigarette. It was one given to me the previous night by the bald man who insisted that lighting it would keep the ghosts at bay. Was it sane to trust the ramblings of a man gripped with madness? After much contemplation, I decided to light the cigarette, if only for the placebo effect of peace of mind. Fumbling with the lighter, that's when the young man appeared. By the time I had the lighter in hand, he was already at the edge of the platform, his gaze heavy. If you don't want to die, you'd better put that lighter down. My hand, clutching the lighter, spasmed uncontrollably, almost sending it clattering to the ground. But as fear peaked, I found an odd numbness taking hold. I faced him directly and challenged, if you're going to kill me, just do it. Enough with the scares, okay. He seemed surprised at my defiance. You're not going to die, just as long as you don't light that cigarette. What did he mean? Before I could demand clarity, he boarded the bus and approached with a detached air, informing me. It's not I who seeks to harm you, it's the one who gave you that cigarette. Confusion rocked me. Such a thing was impossible. Stop lying to me, I pleaded. He spoke, a touch of indifference in his voice. Have you ever heard of ghosts borrowing life from the living? I stared blankly and shook my head, admitting my ignorance. A ghost, before taking a life, will offer a cigarette and then ask for a light, he continued. Eyeing the lighter in my grasp, if you had lit it, by the time it burned out, so would your life. So, you're not here to harm me, I gaped at him, a headache beginning to throb. My world spun as I considered him, then the cigarette, my head pounding with a constellation of questions. Why would I harm you? Do we bear a grudge? He asked, countering my silence. Indeed, even malevolent spirits traditionally sought reason for vengeance. He chuckled lightly. Who's convinced you I'm a ghost? With difficulty, I admitted, Frank sterner. He was a driver here before. He arched an eyebrow mockingly. So because he deems me spectral, I must be. I felt on the verge of collapse, confessing, but I've seen the papers, the reports claiming you died of heart disease 2 years ago. That I did suffer from the disease is true, but I haven't perished. His tone became tinged with ridicule. Following my transport to the hospital, I was fortunate to be revived. The reports only stated that a young man was carried to the emergency ward. They did not declare me deceased, did they? Hopelessly dumbfounded, I stuttered, You're not a ghost. He was visibly impatient. As I've said before, I am very much alive. It's the one who offered you the cigarette you should be aware of. I was stunned, but the cigarette was given to me by the bald man, your father. In life, he was my father, he said coldly. In death, he is a vengeful spirit. The young man's demeanor became grim. Before you, there were two other drivers who took his cigarette. You're lying, I shouted, unable to contain my despair. What proof do you have that the bald man is a ghost? Without breaking our stare, he slowly opened his briefcase to retrieve a portrait, placing it in front of me. If you still don't believe me, come with me to his grave. I recoiled at the sight, the visage of the bald man staring back at me, pale and foreboding from the photograph. It felt as if a current zapped through my brain, and I wanted nothing more than to press myself against the windshield to get away. That was him. Was he the true ghost? Panic settled in, and I tossed the cigarette out of the bus window and gripped the steering wheel for air. He looked at me with eyes that appeared to see through the veil of life and death. He's chosen you. He will come looking for you every day, but he can't harm you as long as you're on this bus. Why can't he harm me on the bus? My lips twitched nervously. Ghosts fear the wicked, especially those who cause their demise. My father was killed by this very bus, and he can't harm anyone here, so he's been trying to take your life energy. He paused before continuing, so after midnight, as long as you stay on the bus, you'll be safe. Thank you. My voice quivered with fear and gratitude. No thanks are needed. I just don't want him to continue his malevolence. With that, he stepped off the bus, turning back once to look at me. With those unnerving, temperatureless eyes, remember, you must always drive the night bus. You've entered into this curse, and no matter where you go, it will always follow you. His voice faded into the distance, but the terrifying shadows that loomed under the cloak of night assaulted my heart with every passing moment. Guess I'll just keep on driving as long as I'm still breathing. Resigned, I hauled myself back to the driver's seat, starting the engine. Mechanically, letting the wheels of the bus slowly come to life. I admit, I wasn't the bravest soul. To stay alive, I was willing to endure it all. At 2 in the morning, I drove the night bus back to the depot and found Frank Sterner's office dark and desolate. Looking at his shadow-drenched windows, a crushing sense of despair washed over me. Did he not care at all whether I lived or died? He couldn't even wait till I finished my shift. For reasons unknown, an intense hatred for Frank Sterner brewed inside of me. Wasn't it his lucrative job offer that lured me into this deadly cycle? I even suspected that he had hired me only to serve as his scapegoat in some twisted scheme. The bastard, I cursed under my breath as I made my way back to my rented room. No matter what, life must go on, I thought, but when I returned to my lodgings, I was met with the unexpected. The underwear that had mysteriously vanished, it had returned. As I picked it up, a note fell out. Trust no one around you. They are all ghosts who had slipped me this note. Within the whole company, only 2 people could unlock this door. One was me, and the other had to be Frank Sterner. As a supervisor, he owned the spare keys, so the door could only have been unlocked by him. However, dwelling on it, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. Frank Sterner would have simply called me if he had something to say. And then there was the note, which carried a faint scent of perfume unidentifiable yet unforgettable. That wasn't something Sterner, a man of brawny build and sweat, not cologne, would wear. The hint of fragrance reminded me of a woman. A woman from my dreams with whom I had shared intimate moments. Had she been here, I was utterly perplexed. She shouldn't have known where I lived. After a tense silence, I darted down the hallway and burst into the security room, pounding on the door in desperation. Wake up! You've got to wake up! The doorman emerged, grumbling and grouchy. Why the hell are you yelling at this ungodly hour? You don't sleep, and won't let others either. When did she go to my room? Where did she go? I blurted out, shaking his shoulders in urgency. Are you off your rocker? He shrugged me off with a string of expletives. No one's visited your room. I've been stationed here all day. Not a soul's shadow crossed your door. Could it be? Dazed and confused, I just stood there. You got a fever or something? The doorman, despite his annoyance, checked my forehead. Huh, you're not even warm. Never mind, go back to sleep, I uttered wordlessly, turning away to head upstairs. Once back in my room, I bolted the door shut and sank into the silence that followed. The note's advice echoed cruelly in my thoughts: do not trust anyone around you. That anyone could include the bald man and the young passenger, but what of Frank Sterner? This wasn't straightforward. My suspicion had fallen on the woman being a ghost. then the bald man, and eventually, even the young man wasn't spared my paranoia. Yet, I never once doubted Frank Sterner. Sometimes, the least likely person is the most probable one. Not having any clarity was excruciatingly torturous. As dawn broke, I made a decision to confront Frank Sterner in his office. Passing a convenience store, an impulse seized me, and I walked in to purchase a folding knife, which I discreetly clipped onto my belt. Then, I positioned myself outside Sterner's office, and just like any regular day, he was busy moving in and out. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I held my stack out until 6 p.m., waiting till the last employee had left and Sterner had gone for dinner. Seizing the moment, I cautiously sneaked into his office and locked the door from inside. I scoured the office, but to my dismay, found nothing out of the ordinary. Just as doubt began to cloud my thoughts, a glint in my peripheral vision caught my attention. My gaze locked onto the bottom drawer of his desk, sealed with a padlock. Driven by suspicion, I took the folding knife in hand and prayed to open the lock's tumblers. The moment the drawer slid open, an icy chill cascaded down from my head, engulfing me instantly. 6 dolls lay meticulously arranged within the velvet-lined interior. Each doll was bound by a black thread around its legs, tied into intricate and countless knots, binding them all together into one connected amalgam. It was the intricate delineation of features on the dolls' faces that caught my breath. They were drawn so vividly with a red pen, as breathing characters plucked from real life. My gaze landed on the doll, placed to the far left. Its features bore a chilling resemblance to mine. I looked closer at the next, and it depicted a young boy, followed by figures of a woman, a middle-aged man, his son, and Frank Sterner himself. Why had Sterner linked us all together? What secret significance did this hold? I felt a physical jolt, nearly losing control of my bladder out of shock and dread. Damn it, it's Sterner, he's the mastermind. I realized with bitter agitation. I should have sensed it earlier. The car assigned, the orchestrated events on the streets, everything had been a staged scheme by Sterner. Damn it, my face drained of color as I tore the black threads from the dolls, scooping up my figurine, and storming toward the exit. I still had no clue about Sterner's endgame, but something primal warned me to flee immediately. However, my urgent escape coincided with Sterner's return, his hands clasping a burger. His eyes widened upon seeing the doll clenched in my grasp. His face contorted wildly, blocking the doorway as he roared, "You discovered it!" "Sterner, you bastard!" I yelled back furiously. "What's this sick game of yours? All this time, it was you manipulating everything." Sterner's face darkened, veins bulging like a furious specter. "All because of you." He barked, "This hearse curse is entirely of your own making. Had you not uncovered the dolls, I could have left this place." My rage was smoking, voice harsh as I snapped, "Nonsense! Drop the absurd talk about curses. This is all you're doing. Your twisted lies." His response was a laugh, crazed and filled with despair as he twisted his features beyond human semblance. "You're in hell, you fool. Do you even remember what you've done before your memory loss? You caused this. You are the real devil." "No." Pulsing pain surged through my head at his words. I gripped my temples, my mind aching with a weight sinking ever deeper. My lost memories were beyond reach, yet the shadow of guilt loomed heavy. In faint recollection, I sensed my wrongdoing, even murder. My head ... I didn't kill anyone. I moaned, stricken with torment. "You belong in hell, not me." Sterner lunged at me, manic in his assault. I dodged him, drawing my folding knife and stabbing him toward his abdomen with vengeance. He fell, clutching his wound as blood flowed freely, laughing maniacally. Until his voice dropped to a whisper, "By killing me again, your guilt deepens. It was your doing." My mind shattered, and I kicked him aside. Fleeing towards the night bus with mad desperation, clawing at the door to escape. "You can't leave," came a thunderous roar from behind. The young briefcase bearer from before, now demoniac in appearance, struggled to pull me into darkness. I lashed out with another vicious slice of the knife, cutting deeply into his neck. Blood drenched my eyes, painting them crimson as the bald man jeered from the path. Wielding a steel pipe, "Does this seem familiar to you, Blake?" "Like the old days." "Shut up!" My ears rang with oblivion to their words. I cared only for escape, to separate myself from these apparitions at any cost. I thrust myself behind the wheel and floored the accelerator, fleeing into the night. The bald man stood defiantly before the speeding vehicle, challenging, "Run me down again, if you dare." "You wish." With cold finality, I pressed down harder on the gas. A hollow thud and the bald man's body were flung violently into the air, landing in a bloody heap. I cackled, my vision blurred with murder, as the mother and her child charged toward me, begging, "Blake, I don't hate you, wait. Please, take me with you away from this hell. The note was mine, let me escape with you. You're the same as them, all ghosts. Don't fool me." With that, I crushed everything in my path. Their joint shriek fused with the cacophony of the engine, a chilling symphony of slaughter sung by my hand. I did it, I escaped hell, I whooped maniacally, flinging my arms open, delirious with joy. But then a massive truck bore down from the opposite direction, unavoidable. Bang! The truck hit with monstrous force, obliterating the bus front. As the crash threw me into darkness, my eyes shut and my consciousness vanished. When consciousness returned, light flooded my vision, a hospital operation room. The doctors said my survival of such a crash was miraculous, and my memory might never fully return. I remembered my background and my name, but the accident was a blank, though they said it was a horrific scene. During my recovery, I stumbled upon an old article about a gruesome bus collision where no one survived. Something felt unsettling as I read it, but I couldn't figure out why. After being discharged, meeting a job, I found a hiring flyer on the street. Concord Transportation needed a night shift bus driver for rural routes. I called the number, and a wooden voice answered, "Hello, I'm Frank Sterner from Concord Transportation. We're hiring a night shift driver. Interested?"